I'm Lois. I'm talking with Karren Visser, who's the lead artist on the Blind Youth Photography Project, Never Seen. Karren, what gave you the initial idea for the Never Seen project? What sparked it?
Lois, it was a walk on an afternoon winter's day in the Cotswolds in Oxfordshire, England. They have beautiful walls here. Many of them are hundreds of years old, and they are compacted stone, one stone placed on top of the other, and then with a particular design on the top. And the stone is a sort of a buttery yellow color. And there are bits of vegetation growing in between the stones. And I remember walking close up to one of the walls and thinking, how would it be if I had never seen this, but I'm familiar with walls? There are all sorts of walls. How would I be able to visualize this and its unique beauty? And that's what really got me thinking about working with blind and partially blind people who have a sense of a place, because it's so familiar, like Table Mountain in Cape Town, but they've never seen it, and how others are describing Table Mountain to them, and could they have their own way of accessing Table Mountain and visualizing the beauty of Table Mountain.
Looking at the concept of blindness and visual arts, you are a professional photographer who is partially blind. Why do you feel it is so hard for people who are blind and partially blind to be able to engage in the world of visual arts?
I think that's in part because there is an assumption that visual art has to be seen in order to be appreciated. And often there isn't a consideration for how we might use our other senses and how we could incorporate visual art in audio and tactile. And so from a young age, because we are told not to touch things or to stand back, particularly in museums and galleries, I think many blind and partially blind people feel, as I have begun to feel increasingly more so as my sight is deteriorating, maybe I better not go into the museum. I might make a fool of myself. I might be looking at a wall when I think I'm looking at a painting. And so you step back and you don't go. And as I found myself becoming less inclined, I thought, this is wrong. We do need to feel that we can go, because there's such cultural richness. There's community engagement in museums and galleries that goes beyond our own cultures, opportunity to share stories. And this really made me think, if I can find ways and share those ways, at least I'll be doing something not only for myself as my sight changes.
Turning to the actual project, what was the process that you followed? Tell us about the stages of Never Seen.
The British Council Sub-Saharan Africa Arts funding was very clear and in the requirements for this particular funding. So what I thought was to be pragmatic and to divide it into two workshops. One was a still life that the three participants, Nerjuan, Charlie, and Grant, followed without any sighted assistance, virtually via Zoom. And they gathered their three objects prior to the workshop, and I provided information in preparation, and I also set out an agenda that would help them step by step during the 1.5-hour workshop. Similarly, the one in nature, where they went to Kirstenbosch National Botanical Gardens on the foot of Cape Town's Table Mountain, we made sure to have an agenda that we planned and prepared with Rupert Koopman, a botanist and conservationist, so that again we could guide the three participants through the workshop. And Rupert had prepared sensory and tactile plants, and he also shared information that was relevant to where the three participants come from in Cape Town and the surroundings. This helped not only for the participants to visualize the plants and the setting, but also crucially to share stories from their families, grandparents, their parents. And so for those who have sight, their stories are vivid and compelling, but provide insight into their different cultures and backgrounds and interests. And then the third part was your involvement in collating the material and creating compelling stories that have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so by the time one's listened to all three, you have a sense of their different personalities and interests. And I thought that was crucial in order to avoid a situation of duplicating and it being seen or considered as an exercise for blind or partially blind people, which I really want to avoid, because often we all put in the same group as if we don't have personalities and interests of our own. And then lastly, a crucial element was social media. And this is where, again, your involvement was instrumental, because you have a very wide social media reach and generously shared that with us so that all of us could be part of that and increase our own social media reach and ensure that British Council and Sub-Saharan Africa Arts had a sense of our progress as we provided more than one social media post of the project.
Tell me a little about the creation of those digital stories in order that they become accessible to a wider audience.
The important part of constructing the digital stories is thinking in parallel, thinking about the story, how compelling the story is, and at the same time thinking, if I cannot see it all, in my case, I have patchy sight and a blurry sight, so it's easier to see close up. But if I couldn't see it all, how would I visualize the story? So a lot of the photographs were linked with images that were unrelated. For instance, Grant's reference of the particular protea with a rugby ball. That is a universal image, and many people have touched or felt a rugby ball at some stage in their lives, growing up, whether they are blind or full-sighted. So it was those kind of references that we made sure to bring in, but without them being obvious or add-ons, and then weaving the stories and also allowing the participants to speak as naturally as possible. So it was enjoyable, and they felt that they were, in a way, talking to one person, whereas in the end, the stories were shared widely. But this feeling of intimacy, I think, came through in all the stories.
I'm also, one of the areas that for me was a new experience was including closed captions. Can you tell us briefly about that?
I'm very concerned that hearing impaired and deaf people can also access the digital stories. And also for people who are blind and deaf to feel that they have the opportunity to access the stories. And I wanted to make sure that, for instance, with Charlie, who does have some sight, he had the opportunity to really think through what he wished to convey, because his digital story has a number of layers, important layers, and it would be quite hard as somebody who's never been to Cape Town to really comprehend those layers. So by spending time with the text and creating the captions, Wojtek, who helped us put the digital stories together, is very sensitive to how the captions are presented at the bottom of the screen. He doesn't use automated captioning. So you actually have a sense while the person's speaking of the rhythm of the voice and the captions, and they work together.
What were some of the unexpected outcomes from the project?
For me, something that's really important as a photographer who's losing their eyesight and who's hidden their visual impairment most of their lives until it's become impossible, is that I use my photography, or even when I'm not photographing, I'm constantly visualizing to navigate spatially and to analyze my surroundings so that I can retain my independence and also to protect myself. This was one element that came out. Nurjwan mentioned now that when she's at work, she will spatially map to help people locate certain parts of the factory if they're visitors, where she works. I think the other element was, which I'm really pleased about, is how Grant has used the digital stories to market his own business as a massage therapist. He learned from the structuring and how he could professionally market himself. So we've seen on Facebook his business and marketing, and I have personally shared it with friends because it's very succinct, it's very clear, and it's easily to share. I think the other element is keeping to time and professionalism. This is an international project. We are all working under our own individual strains and stresses, and to be able to learn to put those aside and focus on the project itself, I think particularly for younger participants, is a huge learning experience and an opportunity to understand that we're only ever as good as our delivery. And I think that was a compelling message.
Well, thank you, Karren, for sharing a few of your insights and providing us with a really good context that we'll be learning more about as we go through the event.
Thank you very much, Lois. I appreciate the interview. Thank you.